In this exercise we're going to make a little Minecraft style platformer for Nowhere Metaverse. So first things we need to do is make a couple of textures to use in the world. So just want to drag and drop into our image editor a standard photograph. There's nothing special about this, it's just an image taken with a camera of some grass. And then we're going to we're going to turn this into a Minecraft style texture, so that is a 16 by 16 pixel image. And a quick way to do that, so depending on what your image editor is, this is Affinity Photo. So what we can do is document, resize canvas. So we just want to check the size, that's 2160, 3840, so uncouple or delink and then make them the same, 2160. Top right, resize. So that makes our image square. So let's just flatten this so that we have a square image that we're actually working with. So right click, merge visible. So that'll copy that so we can hide that. So that's our image. And then next, document. This time we just want to resize the document. We want to make this 16 by 16 pixels. Click type 16. And we've got this link, so they're both the same. Resize. And there is our Minecraft texture, 16 by 16. Let's just make this actual size, or not actual size, so we can see the image. So what we can do here is just make a few adjustments. So select, duplicate. Let's try rotating this. Rotate, snap, or rotate, snap, and then blend mode, darken, multiply. I think darken, maybe again, so duplicate. So we've still got the darken filter, so because what we want to avoid is these two areas being the same. That'll make tiling obvious. So we can hide that by just quickly duplicating and rotating our image so that it's not the same all the way around. But for Minecraft, we can get a little bit of, or Minecraft style textures, we can make do with a little bit of lighter, darker patches. So we'll have to be careful of this because it might reveal the tiling of the texture across the mesh. But that's our grass, that's our basic grass. So let's just save this, file, save as. Grass, save, file, export. 16 by 16, we'll do this as PNG, export, here's our grass. So we want to do the same with the rock texture, so let's just grab that, drop it into place, and basically do the same thing. So it doesn't matter about all of this detail, all of this doesn't matter. So document, do that again, resize canvas. So this is a relatively small image, so 500 by 500, so 500, unlink 500. Let's go with the center placement. That's got us that. So what we need to do, scale in a little bit, unlock. So we just want rock, like so. Flatten that. Hide that. Document, rescale or resize. both the same, so 16 again. Resize. And that is our rock. Let's try doing the same thing again, so duplicate. Let's try that. Let's try. I think it's going to be darkened again. Oh no, average is okay, so that's alright. Let's try. So we've duplicated that essentially and mirrored it, but obviously we're rotating. So we've got this here, this here, this here, and this here. So let's do another one. Duplicate. Let's try a different filter. That looks okay. So you might get a bit of obvious tiling on this one because we've got this kind of ring of green, but it'll do for our purposes. But that's just a quick way, a couple of quick ways of creating some very basic Minecraft style textures. We just square up whatever image, base image that we're using, we just square it up, size it so that it's the size that we need it to be as a square object, and then resize it or rescale the document to 16 by 16 pixels. So save as. Rock. And then we've got one more, which is wood. Let's just export that as PNG. So export 16 by 16 PNG, export, save. So our wood or bark. That's our very gnarly bark texture. So we'll do the same thing again. And what we can do here actually before we do that is rescale it so that our entire image is filled with our bark texture. Like so. Let's just flatten that. Merge. Hide that. Document. Resize canvas. 2160. Decouple 2160. Resize. Flatten that. Merge visible. Hide that. So that is our what's going to be our wood texture. So document, resize document, make that 16 pixels. And that is our wood texture. So what we'll do with this is just make it a little darker. So duplicate, let's rotate it. Darken, multiply, darken, multiply, so that will be our wood texture, although that looks more convincing as rock. So that's another thing that we can find ourselves with unexpected results from the different things that we work with. So again, so let's just save this, save as. This is our wood. Save, export, 16 pixels, PNG, export. So we've got one more texture to make, and that is dirt. So let's do the same thing again. Pull in an image. We want to generally focus on this central area, but we'll see what happens. So document, resize canvas. Let's go with the central point. Make them the same, so 21, 60. Resize. That's getting us there. Unlock. Switch mode. Expand this a little bit. Doesn't matter about these because when this is shrunk down, these will just become pixels. So we want to flatten this or merge visible. Hide, so that is our image. So what we can do here is add a layer, fill it with a color. Let's go with a brownish tone. Change the mode. So we can either do overlay or soft light. Let's try soft light. So let's document, resize, 16 pixels by 16 pixels. And that's what we've got. So that's our dirt. So using the soft light, hard light, it's too hard, overlay. So overlay works better at this scale, so we'll go with that. And you can see that those areas have just become pixels. Don't need to worry about that, and we might not necessarily need to do the duplicate. Let's try it anyway and see what it does. Let's duplicate, rotate, let's blend this. Darken, although again we have to watch out for repeats because we flipped essentially the image. So what we can do again is rotate. That's the same. So that's our image overlay. That's okay. So that's our dirt. So let's save this. Export. And then we have our 4 textures. We might not necessarily use all of these, but we have 4 textures. So we have grass, rock, wood, and dirt. So all we need to do next is use these in Blender on our world. So that's what we'll do next. So in Blender, now that we've got our Minecraft style textures made, we can start making our little level. So we'll want to switch to scene properties, and the first thing we probably want to add to the scene, aside from the cube and the light and the camera, the defaults, is from our entity options, it's the player. So if we click the button, it'll drop in a player that's obviously hidden inside the cube. So let's just hide that for the moment. switch to material preview at the minimum so that we can see the colors. So it's a red object, a red flattened cone. So this represents the player, and it'll give us a sense of scale as we build the scene. And one thing to note about this, which is important, is that although this gives us a visual representation of the player's appearance in Nowhere, the player actually loads. So let's use our widget. So move, rotate, scale, and the universal. We position it relative to the ground plane, but in Nowhere, hold Control, snap to the grid, the player essentially loads 1 meter above the ground plane. So whenever we place a player node or module, we want to keep that in mind. So now that we've just got that in place, just the basics, that's all we need for now. We can start. So deselect. We can start editing our cube. So we're going to add some materials to this. Material properties. And we're going to use principled BSDF based materials for this project. So we'll leave them at the defaults. So there's our principled BSDF. That's our preview. That's the standard material that's assigned to all our primitives. So we can use this, that's okay. So material, let's just rename this dirt. We'll change the color, just the base color, just to make it easy to distinguish between our materials. So that's dirt. We want to apply a material to the top face, and we'll call this grass. So we'll add a new material, plus button. Click the new button to populate this new entry. Click, we'll call this grass, and let's change its color to green, again just so that we have easy visual reference. So nothing will happen on the mesh at the moment because we need to assign this material to that specific face. So that's our basic material. So for that we want to go into edit mode. So our object is selected. Edit mode. And then we want to switch to face select. So we've got vertex, edge, face. Select that top face. Select the material that we want to assign to it. And then click the assign button that we've now got available to us. So we've got a set of buttons. Assign, and there is that material. So dirt is assigned to all the other sides apart from, or aside from, the top, which is the grass. And that's all we need to do for the materials. So just to recap, we can do this actually in edit mode as well as object mode, but object mode is a little easier just to sort of manage the material creation process. So we have our original material. That's just the renamed of the default that's assigned to the cube by default, hence the default. We change its color, name, and that will automatically update the mesh. We then create a new material, plus button. We rename that, so that's our grass material. We rename that and change its color. And then with the mesh selected, or the object selected, we switch mode from object mode to edit mode. Switch our selection mode, so vertex, edge, face. We want to go into face. That allows us to select individual faces. So in this case we wanted the top one, selected that, and with the buttons that then become available because we're in edit mode and we have multiple materials available to us, we can highlight the one that we want, and then click the Assign button to assign that to that selected face. So that's our basic materials. So what we need to do next is assign our images to those materials. So switch back to object mode. We want to be in shading workspace. So shading, there's our object. And we've got, so if we go into material properties, so we can see that we've got our grass and dirt material, and they both comprise principal BSDF material output node. So to these, all we need to do is add texture, image texture. So add texture, image texture. Drop in an image texture node, and then we need to browse to our previously created Minecraft style images. So we have the dirt material selected, so we want to browse for that. So click open, browse to our project. There is our image. So select open image, and then what we want to do is click drag color output to base color input, like so, and there is our blurry texture. We'll fix this in a second. So that's our dirt texture. Select grass, do the same thing again. So add texture, image texture. Open. Entities. There is our image, so select and then click open. And again, click drag color to base color. And there is our image assigned. With those set out, we can then optionally do something else. So we want to expand base color options for our material. And here we want to set texture interpolation, which is set to linear by default. We want to set that to closest. So linear, so let's zoom in a little bit. Linear, closest. And if we watch what happens to the image, we'll then see the pixels, the individual pixels of the texture. So do the same for dirt. Expand the base color options. Change the texture interpolation closest, and then we can see our dirt pixels. This just helps us visualize our object. So what we want to do now that we've got our materials assigned, we can unwrap, UV unwrap, or clarify the UVs of our object. So this is just a basic cube. So we do that, UV editing. So UV editing, there's our object. We're going to switch to, so click drag, middle mouse click drag. We want material preview so that we can actually see our materials. And then what we'll find is if we zoom in, so if you select the whole thing, so that's the UV, the default UV for our cube. So what we want to do is unwrap each of these faces one to one so that the entire UV occupies our texture. So the simplest way to do that is just to select a face, and then from the UV menu, either in the 3D view or the UV menu in the UV editor, we want UV, unwrap, unwrap, and that'll essentially reset it. Do that for all the faces. So we can do that in the 3D view again, so UV, and in this one we've got the reset option, and that will do essentially the same thing. So select, reset, select, reset. So just as a temporary measure, if we want to determine which orientation our UV takes relative to our image, what we can do is use the tools provided by Texture Paint. Zoom in. So we're going to have to reduce the paint tool, which is set to 50 pixels at the moment, so let's scale this all the way down to 1 pixel. Let's see what we're looking at. All we need to do is just paint. So this is temporary. It just gives us an aid, a visual aid, to determine which way up the UV is relative to our image. It's stored only in Blender whilst the project is being worked on. So if we save the file or reload it, this information will be lost. But this is a quick way of determining the orientation of UVs relative to our textures. That doesn't require that we have to go into an image editor and edit the image itself and then fix that later on. So now that we've done that, just that little tweak, we can do the same thing to the grass texture. So we use the Browse Image to be Linked button. Do the same thing so that we can see which way around the grass is. Oh, it's that way around. So now that we've got those two in place, go back to UV Editing Workspace, select our UVs, use the Rotate tool, or we can use the Universal, which gives us the widget and the handles. Hold Control, snap to the rotation. That gives us a rotation. So we've got, the handles don't appear too clearly at this scale because we are talking about a 16 by 16 pixel image. So the corners scale in multiple directions, the edges in one direction only. The cross in the middle is our drag. And then there's a round node at the tip of this little spike that allows us to rotate. And if we hold Control whilst we're doing that, it'll snap to the increments or the rotational values. So let's rotate that one that way. Let's check our orientation. So view, viewpoint, front. So that's the front. So we need to rotate that round. And then we've got the bottom one that we've got to do. So UV, unwrap, unwrap. So that's facing the side. It's now facing the front. And that's our basic cube. And just to emphasize the temporary nature of this painting to our image, what we can do is go into the image menu and just reload, and we'll lose this white bit because it reloads in the original image. So that's our dirt cube. So back to Layout Workspace. That's what we've got. And let's just save the file. Save as. phase 1. That'll save the project so that we have a restore point if we need to for us to continue. So just to recap, what we've done is loaded in from scene properties. We've loaded in the player entity so that we can scale our scene relative to it. But remembering the player loads a meter above our plane, our ground surface, so Control, snap that down, and then let's just duplicate this. Duplicate objects, so object, duplicate objects, press escape to reset, Control, object, duplicate objects, reset, Control, select, so that's shift click, objects, duplicate objects, press escape, leave those selected objects, duplicate, escape, let's do one more, so it's going to be 4x4, object, duplicate, that's 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, duplicate, escape, by 4. And we can see when we were talking about what we have to be aware of when painting our textures, we can see we've got our repetition areas. It's not quite so obvious with the dirt, but we still do have them. So these are things that you do need to be aware of with textures generally. So let's just do a quick test. I'm going to switch to render display so we get a better sense of what the material is doing, because we've got some specular highlights on the grass and the dirt, although we can't quite get an angle. There we go, on the dirt as well, so we want to get rid of these. So material properties, select our object, doesn't matter which one, we can make some adjustments. That's grass, that's dirt. So grass again. So that we're dealing with some flat textures without any specular. Okay, back to material preview, and then we'll continue. So save as to. So now that we've got that, let's make a simple fence, and that'll go around our platform. So add mesh cube. We want this to be 1 unit high, so Control snap, and we might as well model it in place. So what we can do here, view, sidebar, make sure that we are on the item tab so that we can see the scale options. And what we'll do is let's type 0.25. So click type, click type, that looks okay. It might be a little thick, but yeah, that might be a little thick, but we can adjust that later on if we need to. Right, so material. So we can either click the plus button, because this is a new mesh primitive or primitive object, so just a cube. It has no material assigned to it by default. That only is assigned for the starter cube. Anything we add after the fact does not carry a material normally. So we can either click the plus or the new button. Plus will add an instance that's not populated, so this will be blank, or we can just click new and it'll create an instance and populate it. So again, click to rename. Let's call this fence. Base color, we'll change that. Let's go with a darker brown. That's all we need. Shading workspace. So same again. Add texture, image texture. And we need to load in, open our wood texture, which is down here. So select, open, link that through. So that's assigned. Now we can go into UV editing, and we've got the default mapping for this that is associated with the original cube, which is that, but we want to change that. So again, select the individual face, UV or UV. Let's try reset, and this time, because we shaped the mesh in object mode, so if we just view sidebar item, let's just pop back into object mode. Because we shaped this, so we scaled it front, back, left, right, we've got a disparity between the scale values of the mesh, so each face is being unwrapped relative to its original size rather than its actual size. So we need to fix this. Select the mesh, select the object, object menu, apply, rotation and scale. So if we do that whilst we keep an eye on the scale values, so at the moment it's 0.25, 0.25 and 1.0. Object, apply, rotation and scale, it'll reset everything to 1. So now if you go back into edit mode, if we select that face and unwrap it again, this time using unwrap instead of reset, it'll unwrap relative to the shape of the face. Now because of what this is, we might get, which we are getting, odd unwrapping. So what we can do here is, instead of selecting individual faces, we can shift click multiple faces and redo the map, shift click, redo the map, and do the top. Actually, we can probably leave that the size that it is and just where it is as well. But again, because this is a new material, remember that we have to material properties, we have to expand the base color options and set in the interpolation from linear to closest. So there's our post. And that's all we need to do. Object mode. Let's just hide this cube. That's fine. That's okay. So object mode. So what we'll do is use this post to create the crossbeam. So all we need to do, object, duplicate objects, press escape to reset, use our widgets. We want to rotate this, so rotate, hold control, snap to the increments, and we want 90 degrees. So if we keep an eye on what's going on in the top left corner there of the 3D view, like so. And to emphasize the low poly nature of a round, so this is essentially a round post or round beam, what we can do is just rotate that by 45, move that outwards, upwards, and then object, shade smooth. And what this will do is it'll give the appearance of a smooth mesh. And then what we want to do next for this, we want the post to be, well, we can optionally do the same thing to this post. So use rotate, hold control, snap to the increments 45, object, shade smooth, and then what we want to do is we can do this both at the same time. So select both of them, so shift click, we're in object mode, switch to edit mode, and select the ends. Let's just hide this one again. So what number was it? 12. Select the ends, and then edge, mark sharp. So edge, mark sharp. That'll highlight those edges. And then the final thing that we want to do to sort this out is let's just go into object mode so this is easier to see when it happens. Modifiers, add modifier, edge split, and then we want to disable edge angle but leave sharp edges in place. So let's just quickly swap into solid mode so this is easy to see. So we can see that we haven't applied smoothing to the post, but we have to the crossbeam, but we can see what happens when we assign the modifier to both of these objects. So edge split, you see how it hardens the edges because it's essentially split the meshes. It's done it in a virtual sense, not a real manifest sense. So disable edge angle, and what it'll do is it'll split the ends but not the length. So this looks like a smooth beam despite being very low poly. Let's do the same thing to that. Object, shade smooth, edge angle, same thing again. So that's our simple fence post. Let's make that visible again. So that's our fence posts, and that's all we need to do for that. So switch back to layout, and then we'll do a little bit more of a layout. So these are our originals. We want to keep these in their current form. So what we can do is just move them out of the way, duplicate them, object duplicate, escape, move these back into position, and then join these two objects together. Object, join, that creates a fence post or a fence post section. So let's just rename this, double click, fence, and then all we do is duplicate this around our scene. Escape, escape, rotate 90, so hold control, move. So technically we would need to create a corner piece here, but we don't have to worry about that for now. Object duplicate, might have to make this a platform a bit bigger to accommodate the fence posts because they're quite large fence posts. Let's rotate that one. Fence post. Duplicate. 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 So yes, we'll need to make this platform a little bigger because that's quite large as a fence. So let's do that. So duplicate, move those out. Actually, so let's do these ones. Duplicate, and then move the fence post. Duplicate, duplicate, actually let's do we'll use these 90, 90, move those here, and then we'll leave a gap which will be essentially a gateway where the player can access the platform. So that's basically going to be our platform. We'll duplicate this a number of times and just create some levels. So maybe another 2. So let's save this. We need to edit the wood material. See if we can get an angle where we've got the lighting. So select the wood object. We need to alter roughness and reduce the shininess. That's okay. Right, so we've got our original cube objects and we've got our fence components. We want to keep these separate, as we say, just in case we wanted to do something else. So let's turn this into a platform. So select all the ground blocks. We're going to duplicate these. Press Escape to reset. Let's just move them to one side so that we can see them. Where's the center? There's the center. And then we're going to shift click one of these to make it the active object. And then object, join. And this will join all these meshes together into a single uniform object, like so. So now there's only one origin point, whereas with the other objects, each one of these cubes, being an individual object, has its own origin. We'll want to reset this . We'll want to reset this. And a quick way of doing that in this particular example, because of the way that we've made this, whilst it's selected, edit mode, we're still in face select. So select these two faces in the center. And then we want mesh, snap, cursor to selected. So what we're doing is repositioning the 3D cursor to this selection, which is at the center of the mesh, but the top face. What we're going to do is reposition its origin at the median point of these faces. So mesh, snap, cursor to selected. So that's step one. Mesh, snap, cursor to selected. There it is. Then next step, object mode, then object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. We could have done this by setting the origin to the origin of the geometry, so that's basically the center of mass of the mesh. But doing it this way, we have more control over the position of the origin point relative to the cursor. So that's in the center, and that's just a single mesh that's produced by joining all these individual objects. And the reason why we want to keep these separate is because now that we've got our plane or platform, let's just rename this. Where is it? Double click. Let's call this world mesh underscore platform 1. World mesh platform 1, because we can select these, duplicate. So we're going to use the shortcut key Shift D to make this process a little quicker. So Shift D, widget, down, select these, duplicate, down, Shift D, duplicate, let's Shift D those as well. Shift D those two. So we're giving the platform a little bit more depth. So let's select all of these. That, and join that to our mesh. So shift click, platform shift click last, object, join, and there's probably a couple in the middle that we don't really need. Let's just move this out of the way for the moment. We can reuse these, so just move them to one side. So this is platform 1. Move the fence posts. So shift click. If we accidentally click on an object we don't want, a quick way to get that back or get rid of that is just to click undo. So let's duplicate these as a group. Escape. Move those into position. Join them. And then we can join that to our platform. So object, join. So we've now got a platform comprising a couple of different types of objects with 3 materials. Very simple. Let's just grab all of these. So click drag, selection box, move all of that to one side, move our main platform, our new platform, into place, and then repeat the process. If we want, we could just duplicate this platform, but we might as well make one that's semi-unique, so that each of the platforms are different. So we're clicking all the objects, duplicate, so Shift D, escape, let's move them to one side. So we're going to repeat the process. So join them together, edit mode, select the 2 faces that we want to use as our 3D cursor origin, mesh, snap, cursor to selected, object mode, object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor, like so. Rather than doing all that again, let's just duplicate this. So Shift D. So we now have 3 platforms. Let's make another selection. Shift D. Move that to the bottom so that we create a bit of interest. Let's just duplicate those. Move them across. Shift click, duplicate, shift click, duplicate, 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 and once more duplicate. So we'll do a group selection, so click drag, shift click, platform, object, join, so that can be platform 2. So world mesh underscore platform 2. Repeat the process. This could be tricky because how close are we? Drag a selection box, so click drag, and we've captured one. So shift click, that should get rid of that. We might need to do that twice. Once to make the object the active object, and then again to deselect it. And again, always make sure that the platform itself, the main platform, is the last object selected. So shift click it to highlight it. Then object, join. And this is platform 3. So world mesh underscore platform 3. So duplicate the fence. Duplicate, so Shift D, Control, Control, Object, Join, Shift D, Control, Snap, Shift, Join, click, Shift click, Join. So now we have 3 platforms. So platform 1, platform 2, platform 3. And all of this stuff will be our source material that we'll keep in the file, but we'll hide it. So selection drag, and again we've caught that one. So this is what we mean about the shift click. So our active object in that box selection is this mesh, but we want to get rid of this mesh in this selection group. So what we have to do, shift click to make it the active object. So now this is highlighted brighter orange. Then shift click it again to remove it. We need to do the same thing for the player spot. So click, click, and the light, click, click. So now all we've got left are our mesh parts. So let's just click one of these, shift click to highlight it. So that's all the components. And we can hide all of these. So press the H key or object, show hide, hide selected. So there's a shortcut key H. So that's the center of the world. Let's move the player spot back into place. And let's move these platforms up. That's number 3. So number 2. Number 2, number 3. So those are the redundant parts that we don't need. So hide those, press the H key or again, show hide, hide selected. And we have some down at the bottom here. Or do we? No, we don't. Those are fine. So that's our platform world. Very simple platform world. So again, each one has 3 materials, so we've got the dirt, the grass and the fence. So let's save this file, save as. And next we can sort out the collision. So for that, all we need to do, well, to make this easier, let's first recenter the cursor. So we need to be in View, View tab, 3D cursor location rotation. So click, type 0, click, type 0, click, type 0. And then what we can do, add mesh cube. So because we started from a cube, we can drop in a cube, roughly position it, edit mode, make sure we're in face select, which we are, and then just select the face, use the tools, drag that out. So control, drag, so this is going to be the collision. To make this easy to see, we can do 2 things. Object mode, material properties, click new, let's just call this collision. Change the color. So that's our collision, but we can also object properties, viewport display. We can change the display as type from textured to wire. And this just makes it easier to work with the project and not have that constant, what's called Z fighting, that flashing where we see the red hazing in and out between the red and the green of the, well, the green and the brown of the other materials. But that is our collision. Let's duplicate that. Object duplicate, escape to reset, and then move that into position. So hold Control. So this is collision for number 2. Duplicate that again, so Shift D. So that's collision for the platforms. We'll sort them out in a second in terms of their naming. And then the next one is add cube. We need a collision for the fence posts. Ordinarily we might want to do this to the individual sections, but as we've got them all joined together, we can do it as a group. And we don't need to be particularly definitive with this in terms of making the collision the same width as the item itself, because we're using a very simple layout in terms of everything's based on a meter by meter block. We can leave the collision as a cube. So edit mode, same thing again. Just grab that. Exit, duplicate. Oh, so let's just, because that's a new object, it doesn't have a material, so let's assign. So click the Browse Material to be Linked button. From the list, select Collision. then we can duplicate this. Duplicate it again. Escape. Rotate. Hold Control to snap. Let's just roughly put it into place. And then adjust. So edit mode. That end face. Duplicate. Edit mode. Duplicate. We don't need to worry about the origin being offset right now because we are going to join all these together like this. So select, shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click, and then object, join. So that's our collision bounds for the fence posts. Doesn't give us a whole lot of room inside here, but that's okay for the purposes of what we're doing this for. And again, if we want, object properties, wire. And this time, because obviously there's nothing obstructing the mesh, we can see the structure of the mesh more clearly. So duplicate, move that into position. Duplicate. Up. What we could do as well is, whilst we're here, let's rotate this 90. Oh, we forgot to rotate the collision, so undo that. Select the collision as well. Then rotate 90. Let's do the same for this one. So we might have to click, because the collision and the platform is coincidental, we might have to click a couple of times to pick up the collision first, then shift click the mesh, then the collision for the fence posts. Rotate those, 90. So that is our very simple leveled map with our platforms, the collision, and a player entity. So let's save this before we go any further. Save as. Let's hide the platforms and then join the collision meshes. Object, join, object, join, shift, object, join. So we want to call these collision underscore platform 1, double click, collision underscore platform 2, double click, collision underscore platform 3. That's obviously shoved it at the top there. The cone, that's the player, so let's double click and rename that. Player _1. And then what we can do, now that we've done that, so we're in layout, let's unhide. Let's just do a quick save, version save again, because this gives us a restore point to go back to if we need to. And let's do a test, a render test. So we want to switch to render display. And then what we can do is move the lamp, and we can see that it is shading our mesh. So let's make that a bit brighter. So object data properties for the light whilst it's selected. Let's try 5000 watts. So that's our scene basically lit. Let's change the color of the light. So color, we click on the swatch. Let's go with a sort of off-white. So we can see we've got shadows, shading, let's just save this, save as. So that's our basic scene. So we could do an export test at this point, but one thing we might want to do is add a very simple skybox around this, because if we don't, the scene will load and it will be white. It'll be a white background. And that'll make the entire scene quite difficult to sort of discern. So we'll need some textures for this. Well, one texture basically that we're going to. So what we'll do is we'll create a box, a big box, and we'll texture that box with the same texture on each face, basically a sky blue, and that will be our skybox. There is one thing we can check though, is let's zoom inside our meshes. We want to select a mesh, go into material properties, scroll down to the bottom and enable backface culling. So select our materials. And this allows us to check to make sure that the meshes are all facing the same way. So we should have all the faces pointing outwards, because if they don't, they'll disappear in effect. And then the wood or the fence. So that's okay. Do the same with the collision, although we don't see that because we've disabled it. Let's just enable it anyway. So what we want to do here, before we go any further, is just make sure that all the objects are using the same origin point. So we'll use the platforms as our main origin, and then we'll move any other meshes. So the collision mesh, we'll move the origin point for those to the same origin point as the platform itself, so each individual platform. So select the platform mesh, object, snap, cursor to selected. So this is similar to using the faces. We're using the object itself now. So snap to selected, select the collision, object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. Platform 1, so object, snap, cursor to selected, origin, 3D cursor, object, snap, collision, 3D cursor. So what we'll also want to check as well before we go any further is, need to be in the item tab, check the scaling on all of our objects to make sure they're all 1:1:1. And they are, that's okay. Right, so save. So let's create a skybox. We'll want to move the cursor to the origin of the scene. So view, 0, type 0, type 0. Add mesh cube. There's our cube, and then all we need to do, press the S key and just do a big scale out, or type a value. Let's do 30, 30, enter. So we want to do two things. We need to apply a material. So material properties, new, sky. Let's color this blue. Oh, let's go with a slightly sort of sunrisey color to match the color of the lamp. And then scroll down, enable backface culling. So if we zoom into the mesh, we can now see outside into the void. Disabled, enabled, disabled, enabled. So what we want to do here is invert the skybox so that on the inside of the scene we're looking out at the sky rather than as we are now we're looking outside in. We want to invert the faces. So select the mesh, edit mode, make sure to select everything, select all, and then we want to be in mesh, normals, flip. So mesh, normals, flip. That flips everything inside out. And whilst we're in edit mode, what we can do is view, front, shift click, hold control, and we can adjust the position of the skybox relative to the scene. So that's front, right. That's okay. Oh, let's do it a little higher. view, front. Yep, that's okay. Perspective. So what we'll need to do to this is assign a background node-based material so that we don't get any shadows appearing on the sky, because obviously you wouldn't get that normally. Exit edit mode into object mode, and that is our sky. And that just contains everything. So let's just save this file, save as GH. So with that in mind, let's pop back to our image editor and create our pixel sky. So these are our terrain textures, our world textures. So we're going to do the same thing again. All we're doing is grabbing our image, dropping it into place, and as before, document, change the canvas size, make the thing square, so decouple, 2160, resize, unlock, let's just do a little bit of duplicating. Don't necessarily have to worry about this edge. So merge visible. So we can hide those two. Documents. Resize. 16 pixels, resize, and that's what we end up with. Let's zoom out. We do have a slight edge, it's very faint, but for the purposes of what we're doing, it doesn't really matter. So that's our sky. I mean, if we wanted to, we could do what we did before, duplicate, and try hiding the, let's see if this is, how visible this is. Very faint. Let's try hiding the grid. Let's go with that. So save as. Then export. PNG, export. And then in Blender, we need to load this into our material and convert the material into a background node-based material. So in Blender, select our object that carries the material that we want to change. So we're in Material Properties. So that's the preview of the basics that we had in place. So Shading Workspace, And we'll set this up as an ordinary BSDF for the moment, just so that we have a comparison. So add texture, image texture. So we're just dropping in an image texture node. As we would normally do, open. There's our sky. Link that through. So we can see that it responds to shading. And obviously we want to turn off the specular. Let's just check the UV mapping before we, so UV editing. So we've got the box. We can do a reset with this. So all we need to do is the UV menu, either or, reset, and that will reset each face one-to-one to our image. So that's the UV. So that's okay. So go back into shading workspace. And what we want to do here is convert this or change it into a background node based material. And for that, we want to be in material properties, and we need access to the surface type data block. So we click that, and from the list you've got background. So we activate that, it'll convert it into this full bright image because it's using the color that's set in the node or in the preview. Let's just preview that. So what we want to do here is add texture, image texture, and as we loaded in our sky previously, we can use the browse image to be linked. Select from the list and then link color to color, and that's our image. And we can see that that's basically got rid of the shading that was present before. Let's see if we can switch back. So that's our principled BSDF. We can see how it responds to scene lighting and is shaded, whereas the background node doesn't do that. So the color variation that we are actually seeing is because of the image itself. So the image has some color or tonal variation. So what we could do with this is similar to what we did previously. So texture paint, make sure that we are in the right mode, the color is set, so white. That shows the orientation of the image. Backface culling. That's on. So that shows us the orientation of the image. But we have a tonal variation along this bottom edge. So we could either adjust this, so this color, so we could either adjust this in our source, or we could rotate the UVs relative to the image. That's the easier thing to do. So that would mean that way. So rotate. Make sure we're in face select. And we just hold control, snap to the increments. And of course the top and bottom faces present a bit of an issue because we can't rotate that in any particular direction that will solve this color variance. So when we're doing skies or textures that are going to be used as backgrounds, we have to be aware of any color variance that can be compensated for by rotating UVs on the vertical but not necessarily on the horizontal. So that is a quick fix, and it gives us our skybox. Let's change the color of the light. And that is our completed scene ready for its test export. And as with before, we don't need to worry about painting to the image because that is temporary data again. One thing we want to do, expand color and change the interpolation mode as we did before, so linear to closest, and that will pixelate our sky. So if we save this, or UV editing, image, reload, and there the painting has gone, it's been removed. So layout, save as, and we're about ready to do an export and test it in the previewer. So for that we need to do some prep to our scene. So we want to be in scene properties. Let's rename this cube. World mesh underscore sky box. So we've got world mesh platform 1, platform 2, platform 3. So by default these will be marked as, in NWR geometry, these will be marked as world meshes. Generally speaking, that's what most of the meshes will be, world objects. So what we want to do is activate the collision and flag those so Nowhere understands them to be collision meshes. So we'll select them in the outliner because it's easier to do that than trying to click them in the 3D view. And we want to flag them as collision by just selecting that option. So that's essentially flagging or tagging, assigning that property to the selected mesh. Everything else can be left as is. And then all we need to do is set the name of the project, platformer, and then set its location to be saved to or exported to. So click on the folder icon, browse to our location, and there is our folder. Accept. Let's double check. So we've got our light, our platforms, the collisions, and then the player spawn. So let's just save a version of this. So save as. And then to export, we need to clear out anything that's not being used. So all these hidden meshes, we need to just remove them. right click, delete. So all that we should have left are the actual elements that are going to be used in Nowhere, and that includes the camera as well actually. So delete that, so right click, delete. So this is what we have left: the light, player, the world meshes. So let's save this again, save as. Let's just call this export so that we know what's in this file. And then all we need to do is click on the Export glTF button. Export completed. So now we just preview this in the Nowhere Previewer. So the Nowhere Runner, WorldRunner, will prompt us for the file that we've exported. So we need to browse to the location of the file, and we want to load in the glTF file that we exported. So select, open, and then Nowhere will load in our scene. So we need to change the lighting a little bit. It's very bright. So back in Blender, select our light, object data properties, change that value down to a much smaller value. Let's try 50 watts. Let's smooth the sky, shade smooth. Let's double check. And export again. So scene properties, just save over the file, save. Export glTF, complete. And then in the WorldRunner, we just reload what we've just exported. So WorldRunner, file, reload scene. That's much better. So that's our platform. So that's platform 3 all the way up there. And that's platform 2. Whoops. We need to make sure that we also apply modifiers before we export, so that the shading on our objects is correct relative to what we're expecting. So again, back in Blender, modifier properties, we need to make sure that any mesh that has a modifier assigned to it, so collision, those don't need anything. Let's switch to solid mode. So the fence posts lost the modifier that was assigned to them when we combined the objects together, so we now have to reassign that modifier. So add modifier split edge and re-establish the smoothing, and then we can export. Add modifier split edge, disable edge angle. So this is going to fix edge angle. So what we then do is apply the modifier. So more options menu item, apply. Do that for all of them. apply, apply. So save again, just over the same file, because this is the export version, so save. Back to scene properties. Then export glTF again. So that's exported. So back to the WorldRunner and reload. File, reload scene. So now our fences are correctly lit and shaded with respect to smooth surfaces. Let's go full screen. That's platform 2 and that's platform 3. And that is our platform level